Good afternoon, and welcome to South Highland Presbyterian Church. My name's Kenny Lewis. I'm the Director of Music Ministries and organist here, and on behalf of the ministers and the staff in the church, we are so delighted that you are here. Please take this time to silence all cell phones and other noise-making devices. Will you join me in prayer? Creator God, you hear us, our words in prayer, our silent thoughts and pleas, and every note or melody we sing and play. May our praises today connect with heaven and unite our hearts with the sound of eternity. Lord, may the gifts of our voices and the melodies of our instruments move with the work of your Holy Spirit. May we bring light to dark places, restore hope and vision to all who are oppressed, and well-being and help to all who suffer. Today, Lord, we give you our worship. May it be a platform for you, Father God, to touch our lives afresh and build your church. Amen. Our artist this afternoon is no stranger to organ literature or church music. Mr. Metzger has completed his undergraduate degree at the University of Arizona State with Robert Clark. He also is the recipient of not one, but 2 Fulbright scholarships that allowed him to study in Germany and in France with such teachers as Marie-Claire Lamb. Mr. Metzger has served as senior organist at Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where he was broadcast on the Coral Ridge Hour with Dr. D. James Kennedy. He has served as director of music and organist at Second Presbyterian in Memphis, Tennessee, where he played for our associate ministers, Court and Abby Gatliff's wedding. Mr. Metzger currently serves as organist and interim director of music at Covenant Presbyterian Church in Nashville, Tennessee. We are so fortunate to have him with us here today. Will you please join me in welcoming our artist, Mr. Metzger?
In 1942, the Cincinnati Symphony commissioned the American composer Aaron Copland to write a fanfare to begin one of their concerts. Copland would later say, quote, "I remember how I got the idea of writing fanfare for the common man. After all, the common man did all the dirty work in the war. He deserved a fanfare," end quote. I chose to open our concert with this piece and a new transcription that I recently wrote, not only because it's a wonderful opening to any program, but because of the instinct to focus on the people. In 1517, when Martin Luther posted his 95 Theses to that door in Wittenberg, it lit a fire across Western Europe, finding receptive ears of pastors, scholars, knights, the middle class, and peasants. It spread throughout Germany, the Netherlands, Switzerland, France, and on to England and Scandinavia. The story of our program today is how the organ mirrored the changing times and how it developed with the Reformation, and most importantly, how it complemented the theological developments that were taking place. With its essential theological reforms, the Reformation focused on the people, the priesthood of all believers. The language of worship services changed from Latin to the language of the people. Worship music gradually moved from being provided just by the choir and increasingly by the people. And with this, the function and the design of the organ also changed to serve the musical needs of the changing times. Before the Reformation, small portable organs would give singers pitches or substitute for them when there was no choir. Only in the Reformation did the people begin to sing hymns and psalms. Initially, congregations sang hymns without accompaniment. Its role in leading congregational singing and playing preludes and postludes would develop over time for the organ. We begin our program first in Holland with the first Reformation organist composer, Jan Pieterszoon Sweelinck. At 15, Sweelinck became an organist at a church in Amsterdam, one of the last Catholic bastions of the northern portion of the Netherlands. However, a year after he became organist in 1578, it became Calvinistic, and the new authorities chased the Catholic leaders from the city. The Calvinists adapted the church services to the new Genevan model. Calvinists of that time regarded organs and organ playing a significant relic of the Catholic Church, so they actually banned organ playing in worship services and even began removing organs from churches. However, in Amsterdam, the cities owned the buildings and the organs. City officials, wanting to protect their expensive instruments and the investments that they had in them, came up with a compromise. The Calvinists relegated the organ to playing only preludes and postludes. The preludes would actually be, I find this very interesting and creative, they would use the preludes before the worship services to begin to introduce new psalm tunes that were coming from Geneva and the new hymns, or chorales as they were called, that were coming from Germany. Our next piece, All Glory Be to Thee Most High, at the time was new to the people. This setting by Sweelinck would have been played as a prelude before the services, and you will notice how clearly the melody is stated at the very beginning. And then with each section, the melody is ornamented more and more, but I think you will clearly hear how the people were able to learn this tune. Following playing this piece, I will actually stand us, and we can sing the hymn, and I think for most of us, it is new just as it was back in the 16th century to the people of Amsterdam. organist, we move to Jacob Pretorius, or Jakob as he would have been called. He came from a musical family in the German city of Hamburg. In 1602, at 16, he was sent to Amsterdam to study with Sweelinck. He, like several organists from Hamburg, all studied with Sweelinck, and this is through this that Sweelinck was given the nickname the Hamburg organist maker. In Hamburg, you did not have the restrictions of the Calvinists, so the organ actually continued to develop even more fully in Germany, and so we moved from the Netherlands into northern Germany, where really the Reformation development of the organ took place. The organ developed with the changing worship styles. Early Reformation accounts show that there were struggles with the implementation of congregational singing. Hymns were sung unaccompanied at first, as we noted. However, there was a problem with the pitch getting lower and lower with each successive verse. And sometimes people would not even be staying together. In one portion of the church, one group would be singing too slow, another side of the church would be singing too fast. And so you can imagine all of the mayhem that was starting to take place as people were learning to sing for the first time. So to solve this problem, they began to use the organ to lead the singing. And with this expanding musical role, larger organs actually began to be developed, and we begin to see the organ to become the instrument that we know today, because they needed to be heard over the congregation. Our next piece by Jakob Pretorius is the Preambulum in D. Most of Pretorius's music, while we knew about him, it was not until about 1964 that actually his music that we actually have today was discovered. Interestingly, there was a renovation of an organ taking place in Germany, and they found strips of paper that was being used to repair and even keep the winding of the organ airtight. So these strips of paper which were discovered were carefully pieced back together, and previously unknown music of Pretorius was found, providing us this piece that we are about to enjoy now. What you will find interesting about this piece is, to our ears, it may seem like it's not changing a lot harmonically because music was being developed, but you will find interesting techniques. And one of the techniques I would like to demonstrate for you, after this opening lyrical section, you'll start to hear a fugal section that uses this theme here. So you'll hear this theme being used in the top voice and in the middle voice and eventually come into the pedal. And then he develops this idea, and then all of a sudden, in the very last section, he will do that theme at twice the speed. It's really quite interesting how, even though he's not developing the harmonies as much as we would think of today, by doing all of these different techniques to develop this fugal idea, you can how joyfully it all crescendos to the end. And I feel it quite charming. For our third generation of Reformation organists, we moved to the music of Dietrich Buxtehude. Buxtehude was a giant figure as both composer and organist. He continued. Hold on, just turned it off. All right, I'm going to put it in my pocket. Buxtehude was a giant figure as composer and organist, particularly there in North Germany. He continued the development of the hymn prelude, as we heard with the first piece by Sweelinck, A Glory Be to God. The role of the hymn prelude, while no longer was needed to teach the tunes, because the congregation now, after several generations, actually knew the hymns that they were singing. So now they were used to actually communicate and to sort of expound on the text, and in a way to communicate to the listener. At that time, it was a widely held belief that the purpose of music, whether sacred or secular, there was not such a dividing line in people's minds back then, that the purpose of music was to arouse targeted passion or affection. Music could be used to inspire feelings of awe, joy, or a sense of reverence. One pastor wrote that the principal reason organists were used in the church was, quote, so that through the power of harmony, the souls of the listeners might be freed from all wild and destructive affects, and in place of these wild and destructive affects, noble and holy feelings might be aroused, end quote. Even today, the organ still communicates a sense of reverence and awe like no other instrument in worship. I personally believe that this is because the organ is unique, and that it is the only instrument that I'm aware of, is certainly in Western music, that was designed specifically for the church and its worship. So next we will hear by this wonderful composer, Buxtehude, a setting of the wonderful hymn, O Sacred Head Now Wounded. The fifth generation of Reformation organists. As we previously noted, Buxtehude became famous far and wide, and people from all over Germany and even Northern Europe would flock to hear his concerts there in Lübeck. A young Bach, age 20, was given permission for a study leave, so he walked 200 miles to Lübeck on foot to hear Buxtehude play. The concerts were so exciting that Bach accidentally forgot to return to work for 4 months, was quite in trouble when he got back. During the visit, Bach had the opportunity to play for the aging Buxtehude. Upon hearing him play, Buxtehude then proposed that Bach succeed him upon his retirement. However, there was one catch. Bach had to marry his eldest daughter. The daughter was several years older than Bach and apparently not very pretty, so Bach politely declined the offer, and an amazing position there in Lübeck. However, a year later, Bach would marry Maria Barbara, a much better match, and by all accounts, they had a wonderful marriage and would have 7 children together. When Bach was 31, he took a position of court organist in Curtin to Prince Leopold. In May 1720, Bach accompanied the prince to a spa in Karlsbad. He returned nearly 2 months later to discover that his young wife, Maria Barbara, had died of a sudden illness and had already been buried before he could even say goodbye. She was only 35 and left him with 7 children. In his grief, scholars in Germany believe that he wrote our next piece to memorialize her. Extraordinary is the only word that I would use to describe this music. Bach uses the full expressive capabilities of the organ, Baroque composition, and his God-given talent to communicate the depth of his grief. You will hear a harmonic language that was unique, certainly, at this time in music history. The depth of emotion communicated is not something normally that we would think that we would hear in Baroque music. As we listen to our next piece, I believe you will hear the journey of Bach's grief and lament, but you will also notice his gospel hope as he moves from the minor keys to a glorious conclusion in G major as the music finally comes to rest. Now, lest we assume that everything developed smoothly in the Reformation and that organists always serve their congregations well, we should indulge in a few anecdotes. One preacher preached then and then published a sermon that decried what some organists were doing. He said, quote, "There is also a sin when organists, with the ill-timed playing and runs, hinder and impede devotion. They impede the congregation and cause devotion to go awry with their running interlude, odd preluding before every verse, cutting apart, piecing together, holding out for a long time after every line, splitting apart, and ornamenting when they could readily play in a truly unobtrusive manner." End quote. My favorite anecdote comes from 1742, when one writer related an incident. He had visited a public house in a particular city on a Sunday. There he overheard the barmaid telling the serving boy, "Today the schoolmaster played the hoppity." Upon inquiry, he learned that the schoolmaster, who was the organist, could only play 3 different postludes, which the barmaid had called the hoppity, the skippity, and the jumpity. Following the death of Bach, for the next 100 years, apparently the organists and organ playing continued with not a lot of change. Bach, who we just heard, was really the conclusion of the Baroque period. It was not until 100 years later that our next composer of interest came on the scene, which was Felix Mendelssohn. When he came, the organ was beginning to undergo a bit of a renaissance, but also the culture of his time was becoming decidedly more conservative, certainly in Victorian England. Mendelssohn was born to a wealthy Jewish family in 1809 in Hamburg, Germany. His father, Abraham Mendelssohn, converted to Christianity, and Felix and his siblings were raised as Lutherans. When you read Mendelssohn's correspondence, you find a fantastic intellect, and even more importantly, you see that he indeed was a devout Christian. Mendelssohn also traveled to England and became close friends with Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. Mendelssohn became their musical hero, and there's wonderful writings in Queen Victoria's diaries about meeting Mendelssohn and the fun that they had playing music together. Mendelssohn was a highly self-critical composer who revised and improved pieces several times. The conservative Victorian era influenced the church music of its time and certainly shaped how Mendelssohn wrote for the organ. He was encouraged by a publisher there to compose for the organ, but the organ, as even today, was used as a church instrument, as an instrument of worship, and therefore his compositions were meant for worship. For example, you hear in our next piece, the Andante alla Marcia, which was crossed out several times in the manuscript, and Mendelssohn actually decided not to publish it because he knew that it would be played in church, and he began to think in that very conservative era that it actually would not be appropriate, and I'll let you judge for yourself when you hear it. Scholars believe this is why the Andante march was actually revised later as a softer and slower piece. It's very much the same piece, but replacing the word march for religioso. So we will hear 2 versions of the same piece of music from the highly self-critical Mendelssohn, the second, in his opinion, better for worship. So, was that the hoppity, the skippity, or the jumpity is the question. So if Mendelssohn was influenced by the conservative Victorian area, a young Giacomo Puccini did not feel constrained at all in 19th century Italy. He had no qualms about bringing the carnival from the streets to his Catholic church, which that was written for his church. We now move from Italy to France. Our next composer, Naji Hakim, is a living composer. He is of Lebanese descent, but was raised and trained in France and represents modern French organ playing and composition. He wrote our next piece, Tannants, in 2020 as a concert piece and also a postlude. Tannants means rush and means dance in Russian, but actually the rhythm comes from the Spanish folk dance, the Basque fandango. Is our next piece appropriate as a postlude today? I have asked my congregation, I actually did play it. As a postlude, they want me to play the Puccini, but I have not been able to bring myself to do that. But I have played our next piece. It's a very modern piece, and you will notice that there's a lot of changing rhythms. But in that question, is it appropriate? We do know that David danced for joy when the Ark of the Covenant was returned to Jerusalem. So perhaps a dance is not completely out of line, even for us stodgy Presbyterians. I'll let you decide for yourself. Thank you. As we move now to present day and the church and the music of our worship here in the United States, we come to a beautiful hymn, It Is Well With My Soul, by Horatio Spafford. And we will sing an arrangement that I recently wrote and would love us to sing together. If you don't know the story, it's an amazing story, and I think it's worth recounting. Spafford was a successful attorney and real estate investor who lost a fortune in the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. Around the same time, his beloved 4-year-old son died of scarlet fever. Thinking that a vacation would do his family some good, he sent his wife and 4 daughters on a ship to England, planning to join them there after he finished some business at home. However, while crossing the Atlantic Ocean, the ship was involved in a terrible collision and it sunk. More than 200 people lost their lives, including all 4 of his precious daughters. His wife, Anna, survived the tragedy. Upon arriving in England, she sent a telegram to her husband that began, "Saved alone, what shall I do?" Horatio immediately set sail for England. At one point during his voyage, the ship captains, aware of the tragedy that had struck the Spafford family, he summoned Horatio to tell him that they were now passing over the spot where the shipwreck had occurred. As Horatio thought about his daughters, words of comfort and hope filled his heart and mind, and he wrote them down, and they have since become a well-beloved hymn of comfort. When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. How often in history, how do we see how great trials and suffering have been redeemed and even used by God as encouraging examples and comfort to others. Our modern American worship has a wonderful tradition of great hymns, and I would love us to stand and sing this hymn together. As many of you know, at my church on March 27th, we experienced a very tragic event. And this program that I'm playing for you tonight, actually all of it was written for my congregation just a few weeks ago. And we've actually commissioned several pieces of music in remembrance of March 27th. And the first of that was delivered was this setting of variations on the Church's One Foundation. It was a hymn that I knew would be truly appropriate for such an event, and it encapsulates the universal battle and triumph of the church throughout history, and certainly its truths are greatly encouraging to us as a church and also as individuals. You will notice that our composer, Denis Bedard, who is a Canadian composer, has written in such a way that I think is both joyful but also tinged with melancholy, and that was intentional on his part. The final few bars of the piece, you will hear these amazing, I think almost crushing chords with double pedal that you will be able to see. Since we have a console out front here, you'll be able to see how I believe those pedals show the solid foundation upon which the church stands. As I play those final chords, I think we can all imagine Martin Luther pounding the 95 Theses to that door in Wittenberg at that church, all the way back at the start of the Reformation. As Matthew 16:18 says, "Upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." Following the events of March 27th at my church, Covenant Presbyterian in Nashville, we were not able to, happened on a Monday, we were not able to return to the building until Wednesday. On Thursday, as soon as possible, people began to come up the hill and work to reclaim their church. When I arrived, I saw many church members diligently working to prepare the sanctuary for Hallie Scruggs' memorial service that was to be there that Saturday. One of our elders saw me and asked if I would be willing to play the organ. He said that there was such a heaviness in the sanctuary and throughout the building, and it would be such an encouragement not only to the church members, but also to the workers who had to do some very difficult work. Immediately, the hymn of Mighty Fortress came to mind, and that is certainly what I played, and actually, it was videotaped and sent out to the congregation, and little did I know what an encouragement that it would be. At Hallie's memorial, Chad, when he got up to speak, one of the things he said was that he wanted the memorial there at Covenant, if at all possible, and that our worship was our protest. And I really felt that that was more powerful than ever, and when we had that service together. I do want to conclude our program by singing this wonderful hymn, and actually it is the arrangement that I had played for on that day. Mighty Fortress is called the Battle Hymn of the Reformation. And as I wrote my arrangement, I hope, just as composers of the past, I hope that it would not only lead the congregation well, but that I would use my creativity and that the organ would enhance and communicate the feelings and emotions behind the text. I begin with a triumphal introduction that I wanted to communicate the mighty power of God as we march into battle. When writing verse 3, I use darker harmonies. In particular, you will notice when we sing the phrase, his rage we can endure, I chose the most dissonant, foreboding harmonies, particularly with an ugly chord under the word endure. From the triumphant introduction with its minor middle section to the dark harmonies of verse 3, you will notice that the phrase, his rage we cannot endure, is truly something that we find great hope that we can endure it with Christ. When Martin Luther wrote A Mighty Fortress in 1527, a pandemic had hit Wittenberg. Sound familiar, a pandemic? And he was taken very ill. At the time, Turkish forces were threatening German borders. Further threats were coming from Catholic armies. There was theological controversies with the Catholics and even some radical Protestants. A Mighty Fortress, as I said, is called the Battle Hymn of the Reformation, but when it was first published in Luther's day, it was published actually with the heading, A Hymn of Comfort. So as we conclude our program, let us join our voices in comfort and triumph as we sing together.
please join us for a reception to meet our artist. This way, food.